I read 20 books in the first quarter of the year, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Fallon. I am 34 years old and I make bookish content here on YouTube. Today's video is going to be a sort of wrap up of the books that I've read so far this year. Now, I'm aware it is May, but I am only going to be focusing on the books that I read in January, February, and March. So the first 3 months of the year or the first quarter of the year. I feel like breaking it down this way, doing it quarterly, is a little bit more manageable and a little bit more organized. So let's start with January. Now, I am going to warn you, I read 7 books in January and the bulk of them, meaning 5 of them, are Sarah J Maas books. So let me back up and explain. 2 years ago, I read the first 2 books in the ACOTAR series. I read the first 2 books, and then for whatever reason, I didn't continue reading them. I don't even remember what it was at this point. But at the tail end of 2023, last year, I had a friend of mine that was like, hey, I'm reading these books, I'm really enjoying it. And it was really fun to talk about them with her and get to experience her joy while reading them. So I was like, you know what? When you get to A Court of Wings and Ruin, let me know and I'll pick the book up and I will read it with you. So that is exactly what I did. So these are the first 2 books in the series. Thorns and Roses and then Mist and Fury. I had read those years ago, but when she got to A Court of Wings and Ruin, I decided to pick the book up and read it with her. So from there, I read A Court of Wings and Ruin. That is so hard to say. Frost and Starlight and Silver Flames. I have Wings and Ruin and Silver Flames. I didn't even know that Frost and Starlight was a thing until I started reading these with her. I don't know. I must have like missed the mark on that. But anyway, I read these and Frost and Starlight. The only book that I gave a high rating to was Silver Flames. Out of the entire ACOTAR series, Silver Flames is my favorite. I gave it a 5 stars and the rest of them got they got 4 stars because they're not terrible. I know I don't need to say much about these books because there's tons of videos on the internet about all of the Sarah J Maas books, whatever. But from there, me, her, and another friend moved on to the Crescent City series. So then next I read House of Earth and Blood and this is upside down, House of Sky and Breath. I really enjoy the Crescent City series. I actually like Crescent City more than I like ACOTAR. It's a little bit more mature, a little bit more grown up. I feel like Sarah J Maas comes into her own when it comes to the Crescent City series. Like, it's like suddenly she realizes how to write fantasy. I don't know how to explain it. I prefer the Crescent City series to the ACOTAR series. So while waiting for the next Crescent City book to come out, I read The Graham Effect by Elle Kennedy. Elle Kennedy is by far my favorite author, like my favorite romance author for sure. She might even be my favorite author. These are comfort books. These are palate cleansers. These are, I know that if I pick up an Elle Kennedy hockey romance book, you can't go wrong. The Graham Effect is the first book in the new series, which is going to be called Campus Diaries, I believe. She has 2 other hockey series, which the first one was Off Campus, and then the second one was Briar U, I believe. And the first book of the Off Campus series, The Deal, follows Garrett Graham and Harriet Wells, and Gigi, the star in this book, is their child. So I was so excited to read this because I devoured both the Off Campus and Briar U series. And so when I knew this one was coming out, I was like, I have to read it, and I did, and I rated it 5 stars because it is that much fun. I absolutely love Elle Kennedy books. The last book that I read in January was Caught on Camera by Chelsea Curto. Another sports romance, but it was a football sports romance. It was a really cute book. I rated it 4 stars. The plot was basically like, it was like best friends that fell in love because of the kiss cam. It was a whole thing. It was really good though. I do recommend it. It was a cute little book, a good little follow-up to an Elle Kennedy book. Moving on to February. The first book that I read in February was House of Flame and Shadow, the last Crescent City book so far. I say so far because you never know with her. This book is a monster, just like the other ones. I did read this with my 2 friends as well, and I gotta tell you, I liked it. It was chaotic. It was all over the place. There's a lot that happens in this, but I really, really enjoyed it. I rated it 4 stars. So far, none of the Crescent City books have been good enough for me to give them 5 stars. And I should say that Silver Flames got 5 stars, but I just mean like 5 stars out of a series. In general, it's a 4-star book. That's just how I feel about all of these Sarah J Maas books. They're like 4 stars. Anyway, that was the first book I read. The second book that I read in February is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. I gave this book a 2 stars, and I just like still to this day don't understand how I continued reading this book. The premise of the book is that there's a vampire king and he comes and he like marries this girl and it's like forced marriage sort of situation. There's a really good premise behind the book, but it's been so long that I kind of can't remember it that well. And the book was so bad that I just sort of have blocked it from my memory. I really, really don't know how I finished that book, how I did not DNF it, but I didn't, and I rated it 4 stars. From there though, I was still really wanting, for whatever reason, in the beginning of February, I was like, I need a good vampire story. And that one did not do the trick. But you know what did? A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This book is, this book is just everything. This book is everything. It is a book that is written in form of letters to Dracula after his death from one of his wives, not his first wife, you learn that halfway through, but one of his wives. And it like chronicles their life together from like when he first turned her all the way through to like all of the other people that he brought into the relationship. It's gay, it's lesbian, it's polyamorous, it's dark and twisty, and it is so good. This is 5 stars. S.T. Gibson, just the way that she writes, oh my God, I loved this book. I love this book, it is so good. This book spawned an entire shelf of vampire books right over here because I liked it so much. You gotta read this one. I followed that up with another S.T. Gibson book, An Education of Malice, and when I first started reading this book, I was like enthralled. I was like, oh, this is the dark, twisty, like fantasy romance version of The Secret History or If We Were Villains, because that's the vibe that it had. It was so good. And it's sort of, it is a retelling of the story of Carmilla, which is one of the very first vampire stories. If you haven't read that one, I highly suggest it. I actually have that also sitting right there on my shelf. It is really, really good. I'm not gonna get into that too much, but this book in general has the same vibes of, like I said, The Secret History and If We Were Villains, you know? I had such high hopes for this book because I love those psychological thrillery type books where, you know, somebody's obsessed with somebody, and that's exactly the vibe that you were getting in the beginning of the book. The problem is that it sort of fell flat in the middle and towards the end. It didn't go in the direction that I thought it was going, which can sometimes be good. Sometimes it's good to be surprised, but it wasn't the case in this. The villain was just not, I don't know, the villain just didn't turn out to be as good as it could have been had she gone with a different route. But either way, it was still a good book. I gave it a 4 stars, but honestly, I think it's like a 3.5. I don't know. That being said, I still really, really enjoyed it and I definitely recommend it. So after that, I followed that book up with 2 books that were Greek myth retellings, and that is probably my favorite genre ever. I gotta say, February was a really good month of like different genres. The first was Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati, and this book, first of all, just look at this cover. Oh, it's beautiful. This book is absolutely incredible. If you don't know who Clytemnestra is the wife of Agamemnon who led the Trojan War along with his brother Menelaus. Menelaus was the husband of Helen, Helen of Troy, and she left him for Paris. But this book follows Clytemnestra from really early childhood, growing up in Sparta with her sister Helen and her brothers and sisters and her parents and all of that, and what it was like as a child growing up in Sparta. It follows through her first marriage and what happened to her husband and child, what Agamemnon did to them, and then all through her marriage with Agamemnon and all her children and everything. And it is just so heartbreaking and so good. Like, there's no other way. If you are a Greek mythology freak like I am, if you're obsessed with it in all the ways that I am, then you will love this book. This is a must read, a 5-star read. This was a 5-star read. After that, I read 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, which anything that she touches is gold. Simple as that. 1,000 Ships follows the Trojan War and a little bit after, but from the perspective of the important women in that time. There are other books like this. This one is the best. This one is, I've read the other ones, this one is the best. It's just, and it's women on both sides of it as well. My favorite part is probably the muses in between. There's like moments where it's like a poet and he's wanting to write this great epic poem, but all the muse will sing to him about is the women of the war. And she's like, if you don't want to write about that, then you're not writing about anything, because this is who it's about. It's about the women and what they did for the men during this and what they had to endure during all of this. And it's just, I mean, it's sad, but it's incredible and it's a must read if you are into the Greek mythology retellings. You absolutely have to read that book. The last book that I read in February was a romance by Kate Goldbeck called You Again, and I loved this book so much. This book was so good. It is a loose When Harry Met Sally retelling. If you've never seen that movie, go watch it and then read this book. Yeah, it's a loose When Harry Met Sally retelling with a gender bend, and the banter is so good. It's also set in New York, and I am a sucker for any books set in New York. Like, I love it. But it's really, really good. It's also apparently Rilo fanfic, but I don't care about that. I love fan fiction, so this book was excellent, and I gave this book a 5-star. And last but not least, we have March. I read 6 books in March, and like February, the bulk of them consisted of one specific author. Not Sarah J. Maas. A different author, but I'll get to that. The first book that I read in March was Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and I gave this book a 5 stars because I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I really, really enjoyed this book. It's a fantasy romance involving vampires and werewolves and all of that, and it is just so good. I will say, there is some aspects to the story involving werewolves that you should research or Google before you read this book. That's all I'm gonna say. Other than that though, the book was great, and I really hope that there's a sequel. Like, I wanna be back in this world. That's how good this book is. I followed that up with A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle Jensen. This is a fantasy romance, but with a Norse mythology twist. I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4 stars. The problems that I had with this book was that it took me a little bit to get through, because toward the middle and the end, Phaedra, the main character, started to become a little bit whiny. She started to become a little bit like repetitive in her thoughts and in what she was doing and saying. She was very concerned with her fate and with the fate of others, and if she could affect that in some way, or if she could change it. But it felt like she was just kind of complaining about it, and she was not actually doing something about it. There was no sort of like, okay, I'm gonna step up and this is what I'm gonna do, until sort of like closer to the end. But other than that, the book was really good. It did take me a little bit longer to get through than it probably should have, but I really liked it. I love Norse mythology almost as much as I love Greek mythology, so that was really good, and I definitely recommend it. The last 4 books that I read in March are all by Jessa Hastings, and they are the Magnolia Parks universe, the first 4 books in the Magnolia Parks universe. I don't know how to even talk about these books because I've never read anything like them before. If you like Gossip Girl or The OC or even Sex and the City, it's that, but set in high society London. Like, think rich, like these people are filthy rich. That being said, the book follows a main core group of friends, but really only 2 core couples. In the Magnolia Parks books, you get Magnolia Parks and BJ Valentine, and then in the Daisy Hates books, you get Daisy Hates and Christian Hems, but with the added bonus of Julian Hates' point of view as well. And you get his point of view because along the way, him and Magnolia have something together that is integral to the story itself. Like, you need to see their situation play out, even though you know at the end of the day who she's ending up with, which is BJ Valentine. There are 4 books. The first is Magnolia Parks, then it goes Daisy Hates, and then Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home, and then Daisy Hates The Great Undoing. I do have, on my Kindle, I have Magnolia Parks Into the Dark, and I did start reading it, but I kind of overdosed on the Magnolia Parks universe and needed a little bit of a break. So it's on the back burner. It's not a DNF, it's just a, I will get back to it eventually, you know. When it comes to recommending these books, if you can't read things about cheating, you know, or heartbreak, or, you know, couples not being together and literally being with other people, then these just aren't books for you. They could make this into a TV show. That's how good these books are. Like, that's how it's written, that's how it reads. The series goes back and forth. So the first book is a Magnolia Parks book, then we go to Daisy Hates, and then we go back to Magnolia Parks, and then Daisy Hates, and it sort of always backtracks so that you get the timeline of like what was happening to both of these couples at the same time, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like we get the Magnolia Parks book, and then in Daisy Hates, we go back in time a little bit so that we can see what was going on with Daisy Hates during the Magnolia Parks book. But it does this, Jessa Hastings is able to do this in such a way that doesn't make me feel like, oh, I've already read this, why am I reading it again? And I'm very impressed by that. Like, I enjoyed these books, so I devoured these books. Like, I wanted to be in London with Magnolia Parks. But yeah, if you love Gossip Girl and things of that nature, then you will absolutely love these books. So that is all the books that I read in the first quarter of the year. And I gotta say, I think 20 books is pretty good for the first 3 months. My goal for this year was 30. And that is because I made such lofty goals last year. And I did not accomplish them. So I was like, you know what? I'm setting the bar much lower, and we'll get there. So I will definitely get there. I have already since then read like 4 or 5 more books, and I'm about to finish another one. So I know that I will reach my goal of 30 books. It's just a matter of when I get there. If you liked this video, if you like seeing this type of content from me and you want to see more of it, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video, come back, come see when I post more. I'm gonna try to post more often. I'm getting into a flow of things. But yeah, thank you for watching. I thought I spilled it on me. I didn't. There, I wed. Court of Wings. So many books. I'm struggling here. Moving on to February, from one of his wives with a